to call this Joint City Council and Housing Redevelopment Authority meeting of April 20th, 2026 to order. Tonight we'll be discussing in a work session the continued discussion of 4D tax classification impacts and potential policy. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Assistant Community Development Director
Thank you, Chair Hanson. Sorry, got to practice the new, it's no longer Chair Reese-Daniels. Chair Hanson, members of the HRA and council member. Do you want to start up the presentation? Please. Hopefully you can, I guess you can see this one. Huh?
Are you able to see? It is possible, since we are not all here, to have folks move if it's easier. No?
I guess I'm good.
Okay.
All right, so if you go to the next slide, there we go. So just a reminder, back in February we met and we covered some background, reminded everyone why we're talking about this topic. We provided some definitions of 4D and property taxes. We looked at the tax impacts of both preservation and new construction, and we included some housing data to provide some context. We posed some questions for you. You asked for more information, and we gave you some homework. We asked you to rank priorities for housing as it relates to the use of 4D as a tool. Next slide. So tonight, we're going to go over your information requests. You'd asked for some info on geographic distribution, the resources that might be available for cost-burdened homeowners, comparison to other communities, the impact of TIF decertification. I'm also going to provide you some updated impact numbers using the 2026 tax capacity and classification. And we'll show the results of the priorities rankings, and then based on that, what direction we see a potential council policy taking. And then we'll also talk about what comes next. So next slide. So this is the geographic distribution. The map shows where current 4D properties, the ones in pink, are located, as well as potentials, and these are the NOAA properties over 40 units that we talked about last time. I would say we don't really see a geographic distribution as a significant factor. That the clustering down along 494 there is really just a function of where our multifamily properties are located, and I think we have felt over time that those properties located along 494 have historically struggled more than perhaps other properties, I think, just due to the changing nature of that freeway.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
I thought there were a lot more NOAA properties in Richfield.
So I think there are, just these are only 40 units and more.
Okay.
So we didn't look at, we have a lot of 11 unit buildings, 10 unit buildings, a lot of smaller properties. When council member or Hayfoot or Leary had called Richfield sized properties, I think are those smaller properties. I thought that was a really good way to think about some of our apartment.
So this may not be a comprehensive.
Right. I think if we were to consider a 4D program, which some communities have to really try to encourage preservation, we would want to look at those. I think that we, I will argue that I think we continue to not want to create a specific program, but instead to respond to if some of these larger complexes say we're going to be at risk of converting to non-affordable, then that's where 4D would come into play. So this was kind of the marker I used was 40 units because that's what preservation buyers have typically said would be the very minimum that they would consider. All right, so in terms of homeowner resources, because 4D shifts the tax burden onto others, including homeowners, that question was asked, are there resources available when that property tax gets higher? And we found that programs tend to be focused on prevention, or in the case of down payment assistance, it's about setting people up for success to begin with so that you're in a housing that you can afford. But there is a property tax deferral program that's available through the state for seniors with lower incomes. And then in general, the general population can apply through your taxes, right? You can get state tax refunds on your property taxes. Next page. So you asked how Richfield compares to other communities in a variety of different ways. And so the next three slides show both our current level of affordability and the affordability of a handful of other communities. The first slide is all housing, both ownership and rental. And I put the yellow line on there just to help you compare us visually to other communities. And that's at 80% of the area median income, which is sort of a general marker of affordability. So I won't go into depth on the comparison. I don't think there are many surprises here. We're more affordable than St. Louis Park and Bloomington. We're less affordable than Robbinsdale and Brooklyn Center. Next slide. And this is those affordability levels for ownership housing. And again, we use 80% as sort of a marker of affordability. And I would just note that these are home values as reported through the American Community Survey. So it's not necessarily what it would cost to own the home and to maintain it. So your taxes, insurance, utilities, or the cost to purchase something now. So just remember that this has some limits. We talked last time that maybe cost burden is a better measure, especially when we think about one of our goals being to keep Richfield as an affordable place to live. Next slide. The next slide is renter affordability, and it's really small up on the screen, but you've had in your packet. Hopefully you can take a look at those numbers if you are interested in thinking about this some more. In terms of rental housing, 60% of the area median income is the more standard affordability measure, especially in Richfield, and so that's where that yellow line is. There's some slight differences here, just that we are slightly more affordable in rental housing than, say, Robbinsdale. Also keep in mind that these are 2023 numbers. The census just recently put out the 2024 ACS data, and we need to wait for the Metropolitan Council to do some manipulation of that data before it's available for us to use. Somebody else asked the question about subsidized housing, and I would say that what that encompasses are those units that have an actual rental subsidy attached to the unit. And Richfield has, in fact, a very small amount of this type of housing. We have 191 units, and all of which are restricted to either seniors or people with disabilities. So the last time we did a rental housing study, which was back in 2012, we found that we had a much smaller number of subsidized units than our peer communities. For example, Edina has 462 units of subsidized housing, and St. Louis Park, 771. And again, that's subsidies that are attached to a unit. On the next slide is information about 4D as a percentage of all rental housing. And so you can see that we are at 11%, and that's including Hempel, which technically won't be part of 4D until next year. But as you can see, compared to other communities, 11% is very similar to others where there's 12 and 13%. It's just Brooklyn Center that has a significantly higher percentage of its rental units in the 4D program. The next chart is about tax exempt land. It's another thing that came up, just, you know, how much land do we have that is tax exempt and therefore not paying property taxes. And again, we really are not out of line with other communities, although there's a much more of a variety here, but just a reminder, this includes parkland, and so you know, that can be a significant difference among communities. Some have golf courses and other things that are going to take up a lot of land. The next slide, next information is about tax capacity. That was another question about how do we compare to others in terms of our tax capacity. And I put this down as a per capita amount because I thought that was a little easier to compare, because of course our tax capacity is not going to be as large as Minneapolis's, right? But when you look at it on a per capita basis, we're not that far below City of Minneapolis, for example. So then the next slide also includes that tax capacity, compares to a slightly different group of communities. But this shows also the percentage of that tax capacity that's in a tax increment financing district. So you can see that we are at the, it actually has, let's see, 2023 information. Back from the last time we had a TIF management plan prepared, and as we talked about last time or a couple times ago, that we are having that updated, and we did have this particular page updated just so you can have that information. So you can see in 2026 that we are now, we still have, are at the higher end in terms of number of districts, but our percentage of the tax base is just under 8%. And I do want to call out and remind you that tax increment is one of those few tools that we have to encourage investment in the community in the terms of new development and redevelopment. So the use of tax increment can also be seen as an indicator of investment in the community. And we would note that the last TIF management plan in 2023, we found that the market value of properties within our TIF districts have increased by nearly 300%. All right, in the next page, a question was asked is, do we have some districts that will be decertifying? Because one of the things that we looked at when we considered the Hempel ask was the fact that we had 2 TIF districts that came back onto the full tax rolls this year. And so are there others upcoming? And again, this is from our TIF management plan, so we had this page updated as well. And there are 2 districts that we expect to decertify in 2029 and 2030, which will add $500,000 to our tax capacity. So I wanted to update the numbers of the sort of the financial impact of using 2026 numbers and classification rates, or tax rate, pardon me, because this wasn't available last month. So you can see that the cost of all of our current properties plus Hempel in the 4D program, there's a $445,000 tax shavings or cost or shift to other property owners. This is actually slightly less than the 2025 number, which was $477,000. And I think that's a reminder that there are lots of things that go into valuation and tax values. It isn't, not everything is held constant, so you can't really measure for sure the exact impact that way. But so the cost to the median valued home of all those 4D properties is about $28 a year. The cost to an 11-unit apartment building is about $175 a year. And the cost of the Hempel 3 properties is $7.45 a year, and that is about $1 less than our estimates from last year. So those 2 TIF districts being decertified did have that impact. We were hoping maybe we'd see a little bit more of an impact, but it turns out that apartment values went down about 1.5% from last year, and the commercial properties went down about 0.4%, I believe it was, or 0.6%, sorry. I have it right in front of me. So again, there are just lots of factors that go into that. We can't really point to just one thing. And the other thing we talked about, of course, is that it's not just an impact to city taxes. That's the thing that we have most control over, but we did have them run on the impact on county taxes, and it was about 9 cents. So again, it's that small amount of a shift. But again, in terms of the county, there's lots of stuff going on throughout the county that's potentially having an impact. All right. One of the other things you asked us to look at was just, what are other cities, other communities concerned about 4D? What are they thinking? What are they doing? And I just did sort of a very small sampling of cities. I didn't go out and ask everyone. But in the case of Edina, St. Louis Park, Golden Valley, which if you go back to their tax capacities are higher than ours, they have actual programs trying to encourage owners to sign up for 4D and preserve affordability. In the case of Minneapolis and St. Paul, they both have programs as well. St. Paul has shut down the program to any new applications. In the case of Minneapolis, they have reduced their requirement to 50% of the area median income, so actually made it stricter. And they also did a study that was quite interesting in looking at the cost per unit of subsidy for various types of housing in their community. In terms of Brooklyn Park, they've had similar work sessions just like this, and they have decided they really would prefer to use other tools rather than 4D. Columbia Heights, I had heard their mayor talk at some various events that they're concerned about it, but when I reached out to their staff, they really aren't studying it or looking at it right at this point. So I don't think, it hasn't necessarily sunk into a lot of communities yet that this reduction has an impact. So on the next slide, we took a look last time a little bit at the difference of using 4D for new development and also for NOAA preservation. So TIF and 4D are 2 tools that we can use to support both NOAA preservation and new housing development. And this slide takes a look at it as the cost difference between TIF and 4D on a per unit basis. So on a per unit basis, the cost of TIF is actually higher than 4D. However, when you look at the total subsidy over time, 4D could in theory be more expensive depending on the length of affordability. So, and for example, in the case of 4D being used for an all-affordable tax credit development like Penn Station, 40 years is the length of time that they will likely be affordable. So then when you add that up versus a 26-year tax increment district, it ends up being a larger per unit subsidy. You know, something to consider though is, of course, while we might want to provide a lesser subsidy and therefore support a shorter period of time, what happens to residents and the affordability of the property at the end of the affordability period? Do we end up with displacement because all of a sudden rents go way up? And is that something that we are concerned about? In the case of NOAA preservation, it's certainly a much lower per subsidy cost per unit, subsidy cost per unit. But again, we have older buildings and they don't necessarily provide some of our housing priorities like accessible units and units with more bedrooms. And then also this is just a cost comparison. It doesn't address who bears the cost. So the next page is where we took your homework that you provided. Thank you for that. So these are the results of your homework where you ranked the different housing priorities.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question on the subsidy slide?
Yes, sure.
I'm just having trouble wrapping my head around the comparison. So like at the end of the 26-year period of TIF, you have a 26-year-old building that's paying full tax. Mm-hmm. But the NOAA preservation thing, like we had a building that was worth $1 million and it pays less for a period of time during the affordability, and then it's still worth $1 million, whatever it's gone up or down to over that time. So like this isn't accounting for like the asset that's left over at the end, right? This is just sort of the subsidy for that defined period.
Right, right,
Okay.
Yep, exactly.
And then one other question, I assume that if a building were to combine 4D and TIF, would that be possible if it were an exceptional increase in value, like a gas station on a 5-acre lot became a giant apartment building? Or would they pretty much never be combined?
So you could use both in theory. When we took a look at, so I don't know if you remember back or if you were on one of these boards back when MWF was proposing a development for the old City Garage South site. We looked at it as a tax increment district, and there was a certain amount of increment that was going to be generated. And then they changed the tax rate, the tax classification down, and realized, okay, I don't know if this, the amount of increment went down so much that it's, I don't know if it would have made sense to do both. So it will depend, and same with Astor Commons, it's expensive to create a tax increment district. For just a small amount of money, you just wouldn't do it. So now we have been hearing from like the Legion, potentially they might be asking for, they might qualify for 4D automatically, right, if they were to go the bond route. And then to also do a tax increment district, we'd have to see the numbers. I just don't know if it's going to be worth it. There has to be just a certain amount to make it worth.
But just in case the skepticism comes up, we would account for the much lower rate of tax when we're considering how much available increment there is.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't answering the question he was asking.
No, I think this was a different question.
Okay.
This is a related question, just to confirm.
Okay, sorry.
You did answer my question correctly. Yeah.
Okay, so ask your second question again, sorry.
If we were to somehow combine these, we would be accounting for the much lower rate when we determine how much increment is available for the new property. Is that right?
The base value would be...
Like the improved value, is it like just based on the value of the land, or is it based on the tax capacity as
Oh,
adjusted
I
by
see what
4D?
you're saying with the 4D would be based on the total. That's a really good question.
Yeah, so Sean, I think what you're getting at is, would we be accounting for that when we're putting together the development agreement?
Yeah.
Yes, we would look at that. And one of the things that we've talked about at a staff level is that developers should not be able to, and they can't, we don't believe, according to HRA attorneys, that they can't come back after the fact and ask for 4D because we have negotiated a deal based on previous assumptions. So they could certainly approach us, we could look at new numbers and make sure that the HRA still ends up in the same place or something like that, but in theory, if we were to combine, we would combine to begin with so that everyone was fully informed about what the impacts of that lower tax rate were going to be on the district as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
Now we'll go on to the next page. So this is your homework results. The colors are the range of the ranking numbers. So what I took that as is sort of level of agreement. So in the case of the colors, yellow or green is the highest level of agreement, followed by yellow and orange, and then purple is the sort of the least amount of agreement on those topics. So the highest priority with moderate agreement is to maintain Richfield as an affordable place to live. Rehabilitate and preserve NOAA housing were the next two priorities, also with moderate agreement. Diversify the tax base was a high priority, but there were a couple of outliers which lowered its priority ranking. And I use outliers in the statistical term, not trying to insult somebody for having their opinion, right? Deeper affordability ranked as one of the lowest priorities overall, but there were a couple of much higher rankings in there as well. All affordable housing ranked as the lowest priority with some level of agreement among everybody. And I just want to say too, I believe these are all priorities. We don't believe that people are saying that lower priorities aren't important, right? But it's a matter of making some choices, right? Because resources are limited. And I want to say, if you hear things tonight or have heard things that make you want to reconsider your rankings, please feel free to resubmit. We've used the results as a way to think about the 4D policy and the goals that we want to use potentially 4D to help us meet. So I'm happy to consider other rankings if you'd like. I'd just like it by Friday of this week. Next page. So considering the priorities that you shared with us and our previous conversation, this is what we want to tell you that we've heard. We've heard that you feel that maintaining affordability for existing residents, NOAA preservation and rehab, and diversifying the tax base are your highest priorities. We've heard that mixed income housing is preferred, that there is less support for prioritizing all affordable housing. We've heard that accessibility and units with a large number of bedrooms are high priorities for new construction over deeper affordability. And we've heard that deeply affordable, supportive, and all affordable housing are lower priorities. And kind of what we would say this means is that next slide. You would like us to prioritize mixed income housing and commercial development. But given current market conditions, you need to be aware that that means development will likely remain slower. You should also be aware that the biggest priority of Hennepin County, Minnesota Housing, and the Metropolitan Council is for deeply affordable housing. So that means that grant applications to them for funding that don't provide deeply affordable housing may be less competitive for those grant dollars. And you should also be aware that there are some HRA properties where all affordable may be the highest and best use, even with a 4D tax classification rate. So while that ranked as a lesser priority, there may be situations where we want to consider all affordable developments in order to get those vacant properties back on the tax rolls. And next page, we have some lingering questions that we would like to hear more from you about. The first is length of time. So as we talked about, all affordable properties or projects with tax credits are likely to be affordable for 40 years. A TIF district, the maximum is 26 years, but sometimes they could be finished sooner. In the case of Hempel, the time period is 15 years. And while they won't receive 4D after 15 years, there's no guarantee then that affordability will continue. So to remind you also, the primary financing often dictates the length of that affordability period, so we may not have a choice, but I do want you to think about it, and also think about it in the context of, given the priority that you all have placed on maintaining Richfield as an affordable place to live, should we be working for as long an affordability period as possible, or should we be looking to minimize that subsidy or that amount that we are contributing? So that's kind of the first question. The second is that the priority rankings indicate that preserving what we have is the greatest priority. And in terms of new construction, we want to hear, do you have a goal for a number of new affordable units that we should be working towards? And just a reminder, I put up there that these are what the Metropolitan Council considers to be our fair share of new construction that we put forward. And the third question we'd like you to wrestle with a little bit is just, what do you see as a desirable mixed amount of affordable housing in a mixed income building? If that's your priority, what does that mean to you? I think we could stop at this point and have a little bit of discussion. I may be putting you on the spot, although I put it in the staff report, so maybe you've been able to give a little bit of thought to that. But so I welcome any feedback you have at this point, or you can always share feedback that comes to you later with us via email.
Okay, any feedback or questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Commissioner Young?
Are you hearing from developers what the holdup or what the obstacle is from market rate development? Is it still interest rates and construction costs? Is that still the primary reason? Or have things changed?
That continues to be what I'm hearing from market rate developers. Liquidity at banks also has been brought up, but generally, yes, it's construction costs, interest rates,
And rents have
and
not
labor.
risen as quickly.
Correct.
Yeah.
And uncertainty.
Rents are flat, uncertainty. During Operation Metro Surge, I did hear from developers who could not get lenders to look at projects in the Twin Cities areas. So hopefully those concerns have lessened, but I did hear that.
I was surprised earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that the market value of apartment buildings has gone down. Now, we all know that office buildings have gone down, but what is causing the value of apartment buildings to decrease?
We're not sure. Yeah, is that just a Richfield thing? I don't know, because because so many of our buildings are older. I don't know. Do you have any?
Some of our newer buildings have been challenging their market values in petitioning for lower values. Yeah, I can't really say. It is not a Richfield thing. This is happening throughout the metro.
Okay. Sure. Commissioner Hayford O'Leary.
I know, a theme we've had in like Richfield housing goals in the past is that 2011 or whenever it was, that project was proposed on the north side of the city garage site. And that was rejected, and there was housing study after that, and mixed income housing was a big priority of a goal, I think, of 80% market rate and 20% within a single building. And then I recall in the year since that we heard from developers that just like they have affordable housing investors and they have market rate investors, and for the most part, they're not interested in collaborating on one building. So I guess my question is, does that still exist? And then I have thoughts based on your answer. Like, do you still hear that people would have trouble doing that at one building?
Well, we've successfully done several buildings since that time, right, with the 20% at 50% AMI, because that is the requirement of a tax increment district. So I do think that it certainly is possible. Can it get higher than that? I mean, the numbers, yeah, may or may not work out.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I mean, typically, when we're asking for, in our redevelopment districts, when we're getting some level of affordability, you're seeing the subsidy go up, right? So that amount of increment is really playing into whether or not those units can be provided. So on districts where it looks like it's going to take us the full 26 years to pay back the investment, no, there isn't a capacity to provide more affordability in that building. The numbers aren't supporting it.
Okay. I guess and I'm sort of speculating, it seems like the goal of having mixed income housing might be in conflict with the goal of having Richfield-sized buildings. Like, it seems more challenging to do that in a 40-unit building, to have 10 of the units affordable and 30. So I guess I would just reiterate, I think a mix of housing options in an area and in the city is important to me, but having it specifically all within one structure is not that important to me. So I think like Penn Avenue is a good example where we had two market rate projects, and now we have a more heavily subsidized affordable project. in a perfect world, maybe everything would be mixed income, but when we also have this goal of supporting smaller buildings and more incrementalism, I think it's perfectly fine to have some separate buildings as long as we're creating a balanced portfolio.
Well, I know one of the issues of the 4D classification is it shifts some of the tax burden to other property owners. Would you say, does TIF do that, or is that not really characteristic of TIF?
I mean, those buildings are paying, they are still paying their full property taxes up front, and then they're being issued a refund depending on what the city is levying. Yes, that money is still getting paid somewhere. I think the difference is that at the end of those TIF districts, the value of those new projects has increased. You know, I think the number that Julie cited was 300%. And so over time, the idea is that, yes, there's a little upfront, but it's coming to you at the end of the district. In a 4D project, that isn't necessarily going to be the case.
And I guess that's kind of what I was thinking, is that with a TIF project, is they are paying at the original rate or level. And so that, with that, I guess trying to clarify my own thinking, but I was thinking that a TIF district does not shift the burden.
It does for a time. I think the thinking on it, though, is that the overall market rate of the project is going to increase enough to pay the community back in some way. That obviously doesn't always happen. You know, there are market forces that none of us can control. None of us could have predicted the pandemic that hurt those office and commercial property values like they did.
Commissioner Young.
I'm a supporter of development, and I'm a supporter of creating affordable units. I really wrestle with this 4D question, and I wrestled with it with the Hempel development because it does shift the tax burden to others. Yes, it's $28 or whatever it is. That's not a lot, but some people are going to feel that. So I like your policy thoughts, the last page of your presentation. And I think I agree with everyone there that is approving 4D as a tool of last resort, encouraging other tools first, not having a policy encouraging it, but using it on a case-by-case basis where it's required. I don't see the benefit to Richfield taxpayers from a large building that has 4D tax status, and then we also put money in from the Housing Affordability Trust Fund. So so I don't see the payback to Richfield taxpayers, except that we're creating affordable units for the sake of creating affordable units. And I think that's a worthy goal, but we ought to also be able to find a way to have some other benefit to it also. And so, like the Richfield size units that Commissioner Hayford O'Leary was talking about, that you've talked about, I think that's great. Or an HRA or city-owned property where we're trying to encourage a building to be built is great, but only in limited cases would I feel comfortable supporting it.
Could you go to the next slide, Michelle?
I jumped ahead, didn't I?
No, thank you. There we go. We can segue to that and then continue to reflect on the previous questions and ask your questions. But I can just say these are kind of where we are throwing these thoughts out, our initial thoughts. Again, the number of tools available to us are limited, so I think we do feel like there may be some cases where 4D is appropriate. It's not our favorite, right? But maybe it's something we need to use. So the idea of, but approving it as a tool of last resort, and perhaps prioritizing it for that NOAA preservation when it means especially meeting our priorities. I think with Hempel, we found it had lots of Section 8 clients that lived there. It had 3-bedroom units. It had met some of our priorities, right? And also including rehab. Those buildings need investment. And so if we can encourage investment and multiply our, what we're investing with matching investment. Continue to consider 4D on a case-by-case basis, in other words, no program to encourage its use. Any project must further high housing priorities, and your priorities came back with large numbers of bedrooms, accessibility, and Section 8 friendly buildings or owners. In the case of new construction, maybe it's possible to use it in the case where we get Richfield-sized buildings or where TIF isn't an option, and in those cases where all affordable is really the best choice for the site. And then that really new development should look to other tools first, TIF and the trust fund. A quick reminder about 4D is that projects can automatically qualify for 4D. For example, if they were to receive LIHTC, which would be really unusual without some contribution from you, but if it were to happen, or bonding or other way, really our only control is to not provide any assistance to those projects through the HRA. If a project were to make it through land use approvals, for example, and move forward without that local assistance, 4D could be automatic, so there might be no control. So I just always want to keep that in mind. So yeah, if other people have questions on the policy thoughts.
If I could just say one more thing.
Yes, please.
I think a mixed income building for the foreseeable future is how much of each affordability level as opposed to how much is market rate, because I don't think interest rates or construction costs are coming down relative to rents. So we're probably not going to get market rate development. It's probably going to be how much is 80%, how much is 60%. So I think that's just the situation we're going to be in, is evaluating these projects that are all affordable, but there are different levels of affordability.
And just to clarify there, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I think when we are saying an all affordable building, we're saying an income, building that is income restricted at all levels. So whether that be 80%, 60%. I think when we are using the term market rate, we're saying that there are some buildings, some units within a building that don't require an income qualification.
Got it.
And so I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. Are you saying that you would be supportive? Are you looking for some unrestricted units in a building, whatever level that might
I would like to see
be?
some unrestricted units in a building, for sure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay, thank you.
Well, I guess I would say that, I certainly think we need to keep 4D as a tool in the toolbox, because as it's been said, there are a limited number of tools we have. But I do kind of like the idea of, using it on a limited basis, for special cases. Looking at the Hempel project, I supported that because I thought it was a very unique opportunity to preserve, 3 NOAA properties. And when you look at, the cost to the average median valued home of $7.45, that's a pretty modest amount. But I do have to admit that at the time I was a little concerned about setting a precedent, and what I don't want to do is open the floodgates, so to speak. Because I think if we get into too much shifting of taxation to other properties, that's a problem. And property taxes, for some people who we don't have even identified in our own minds, is a burden, I know. So that's certainly always a consideration. Councilmember Burke.
Yeah. First, my apologies for being so late, but I persisted and insisted on being here because this is such an important topic. So my apologies, and I appreciate your patience. Second, I want to thank you both for this information that I had requested. I found it very useful, especially the one where 4D as percentage of all rental, that Richfield in the cities that you selected was the lowest. And I'm gratified to hear that the members here are encouraging continued use of 4D. And I agree, it should be carefully used, but it still should be something that's left in the toolbox. We still have some capacity based on that stat. To be quite honest, the rest of the stats as far as, I was really amazed at how widely different the different cities are as far as the different ranges of percentages for affordability. And so, to be quite honest, I wasn't clear to me what kind of result to make from that, but the one that did stick out was that of the cities you selected were still fairly low as far as percentage of 4D properties. And so, on the one hand, I hope that encourages us to continue to use it. It's good to hear that we're going to be selective about using it. But I just want to give you that feedback that I do appreciate the work you did, and I did find it useful. So, thank you.
So I agree with pretty much all of the policy ideas. I think it's a good approach. I think my only concern is just thinking about like the way it worked with Hempel and like playing that out for other NOAA properties. Because it's not like we're gonna have a pool of like 20 properties and we'll get to pick like the 12 that are the best. They're gonna come one at a time, and each time likely there will be organized support to approve it. So how do we have a policy that is like clear-cut enough that it's realistic to say no, even if there is organized support in favor of approving it? And I mean, one idea might be that it, rather than saying prioritize rehab or physical renovation, that would be a prerequisite for any 40 applied to an existing property. But if you have other ideas to like really have teeth that we can rely on to be objective as these come in one at a time, and not having the luxury of just getting to pick on the whole city level all at once.
Yeah, I have thoughts of testing with, I sort of have the list, right? And I think we can look at the list and say, that we see that as an important property because it meets a lot of goals, it's a well-run property, or, and maybe run some scenarios, and we could do that. And maybe it's just for us internally to know kind of, It's really hard to know who we might hear from in the future. I have heard from folks. Of the people I've heard from, I would say one maybe would have considered, but they're kind of well into their renovations and clearly showing that they were able to somehow finance it without us. So, yeah, I have kind of the same thoughts, too. It's like, which property would come next where it would feel imperative, like it felt like the Hempel properties were to us?
I was just going to add that internally, within our department, we work with, we've got the folks that are providing housing assistance, we've got the folks that are working on improving housing, and then we've got the folks that are doing the inspections. We have a wealth of information to help us identify, and I think that we already know some particular buildings that are really important to our community for a variety of reasons. So, Julie's thoughts on testing them. I think there are some good test cases to run it. Why is this so important to us? And then documenting that so that we can give you some clear direction. These are the things that we think you should be looking for. These are the reasons this community is of particular importance. They're all obviously important to our housing ecosystem, but this is where we think you should use your limited funding.
All right, any final comments or questions?
You want to go just to the last slide, Michelle? I would just say our next steps will be to draft a policy. And we welcome continued feedback from you as you are pondering to think about, and we'll especially the folks who couldn't be here, make sure that they know that our email boxes are open for more feedback. I think based on some of the priorities, I think we may also want to update our inclusionary housing policy. It's been a long time since we've done that. We may want to update our trust fund priorities, and then these items be brought back to in some cases, there'd be council priority or policies that they would adopt, but in all cases, keep you all informed about what new directions we might have. Other thoughts?
All right, and with that, I will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you for your work on this. It's great.
Thank you.